They left there, and some of the other tribes left there. They left Chaco Canyon, and they went there. But here's the problem: they didn't leave there because of agricultural reasons. Really, the giants chased them out of there, and
Right.
what they were doing was killing them and eating them. So Steve's going, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "No." He says, "So they're flying along, and he tells that pilot to land here, land here." He goes up these creek bottoms and stuff, and he's showing them the bones of people that have died, and you can see the teeth marks in the bones where the giants had ate them. And he said they were flying along, and they were
Right.
away. Window and throw the spears out the window to keep the giants from getting them. And they would get in those rocks. They couldn't get them once they were back in the holes in the caves there in the rock. They couldn't get them. So that's where the Anasazi made their last stand. And Clifford said this really happened. It went along. And he said the giants. He said we fear there's some still alive around here. He said there's still some around. We don't know exactly where they are, but we know that people have seen them. So a little time goes on. I hear this other story, and it's on George Norrie. He comes up with some pretty good people. And these two guys were elk hunters, and they were in the Rocky Mountains. And these guys said they had about 19 miles to go from where they left their truck on horseback to this place where these big elk were. So he said they got their pack horses, and him and his buddy, they're going along through the mountains there, and they're going to their spot. And he said all of a sudden the horses just stopped and they wouldn't go any farther. And he thought that they started acting up. They'd seen a mountain lion or something or smelled one. And he said that his buddy tapped him on the shoulder and he said, look, look in the distance. And he said they looked up over these rocks and they could see a giant person coming. And he said this thing was 30 foot tall, Dawnita, and was carrying a tree for a club. And they were scared to death that the thing was going to see them. They finally got their horses down in the rocks and got them still. And this thing went on by, and he said they just turned around and went back. They didn't go any farther. But he said that this thing was real, and it was walking through those mountains and was walking along. So you think it'd come out of the ground somewhere?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
There's a cave there somewhere.
They have to be under the ground. Yeah. And, whenever I lived at Los Alamos, there's Bandelier Canyon is out there. And I would love to go back now, knowing what I know now.
Where is it?
Bandelier is over by Los Alamos, New Mexico. And it's cave dwellings of Native Americans. And knowing what I know now, because I thought at the time I was about 14, 15 years old. And I thought, why would they have the doorways so small? And well, they could and up into, the canyon like that. And was it to try to stay away from these things? That could be part of it. And then part of it could be too that maybe it wasn't that small to begin with, and maybe something else happened, and it was actually a building with bigger openings, but it was melted. So there is that possibility too. But yeah, anyway, I would love to go back at some point in time, knowing the things that I know now, and get some video and kind of explore a little bit and see how much of a different perspective I would have.
Cross all the dots. You can put fill in all the blanks, say,
yeah,
there now. And that's what these guys were doing. I mean, that's what these elk hunters told me. Said, hey, these things are very real. Well, there's a guy that's got a show called World Bigfoot Radio. His name's Brian Sullivan. They call him Duke. But anyway, he talks about mountain giants. And that's what these are. He said these things have took up dwellings in the mountains and stuff. And he said they are alive and well. They've seen them in Alaska. They've seen them in Arizona. They've seen them in the Rockies up through the Canadian Rockies and stuff, and they're getting more prevalent. They're getting to see more of them now. Of course, in the last days it said that these things, more and more of them will be showing up. So that's probably what's happening. That the gates of hell have been took off the hinges, and these things are getting ready to start coming through. And there's we got a bunch of people that work at bringing these things forward. They want them to come through. They want to see them,
Right.
And CERN deal, that's what that is. They crank that thing up every time they do. A bunch of stuff happens, but there was there's all. I mean, I could go on and on and on about stories I've heard of different guys have told me about things that's happened, but these this giant of Kandahar thing. Do you know about that?
Yeah. And you've talked to some of those people that were involved in that too, right?
Yeah, I've
heard Ellen Marzulli's side of it, and I've heard Steve Quayle's side of it, because it was interesting. They each had somebody different approach them about it, and then they brought their stories together. And then you've talked to somebody too, right?
Yeah. I worked at this aerospace place, and this guy was a soldier that worked there, and I was talking about Bigfoot one day, and a Wade comes up there. He goes, "Hey, I got a Bigfoot story for you." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Well," he said, this is back in the 60s, but he said, "Let me tell you this one, and I'll tell you this new one I know about." So he told me, he said Grandpa lived at Beggs, Oklahoma, and that's just down the highway here from Tulsa, about 40 or 50 miles. And there's a place there called the Deep Fork Bottoms. And you get off in there. I hunted down in there with my dad, because he had a guy he went to school with that owned the place down in there. And we're talking quicksand, real quicksand, like you see on the movies. I saw big old cottonmouth snakes in there, and just triple canopy. And there's places in there during the daytime you dang near need a flashlight to see. And Bigfoot's in there big time, because I knew it was because of the way it looked. And you could those people went in there and never come back out. And so Wade's family lived close to there. And this guy my dad went to school with, he lived there. So Wade tells me he remembered his grandpa was plowing a field down there when he was a little kid. And he said he was playing in the front yard there, and he said his dad was out there working on a truck, and he said the old man come driving up on the tractor, and he said he got off the tractor, and his dad said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "What's that look on your face like that for?" He's shaking his head. He said, "I seen something I can't explain it." I said, what do you mean?" He said, "Well," so I was down there on the south end. He said, "I made about 3 rounds on the tractor." He said, "I was turned around, was headed back down for another round." And he said, "I looked down there, and there was something diagonally coming across that field. Looked like it's about 9 or 10 foot tall, big and black, and taking long steps." He said, "Oh, come on, man." He said, "Our son's getting to you?" He said, "Nope." He said, we're not going down there no more. We're not using that field anymore." So Wade's dad, he's Wade's a pretty good sized boy himself. He said his dad wasn't afraid of nothing. So he went into the gun cabinet and pulled out a 300 Winchester Magnum and put some shells in his pocket and drove down there and looked. And he said the tracks that was going across that field were 19 inches long.
Oh my goodness.
He said, "Yeah, it was going across there." And he said, "Well, I guess we got a Sasquatch on the place." So they were down in there, and all this, you can get in these woods in Oklahoma, and you can go clear to Arkansas and not be seen. That's how choked up it is along that creek and that river, and there's, the legend of Boggy Creek. You've heard of that, right?
I don't know if I have or not.
Oh, that's a real famous Bigfoot encounter. That happened back in the 60s. Falk, Arkansas. They even made a movie about it. That's what started a bunch of this. And back in the 70s, we'd take our girlfriends to to the drive-in movie, and that everybody be scared because of the Bigfoot movie, you know. And but the thing was real. They've still had sightings down there of this thing, and come to find out, these tunnels we're talking about go under Oklahoma, and they go all the way down there to Falk, Arkansas. If people knew what was underground, it would probably scare them to death. I think there's a whole other subculture underground.
Oh, definitely.
You know, and these reptilians that we're talking about, people think that Paul and I talked about, and you talked about, and you know, I saw one, and I couldn't believe it. I was totally shocked when I seen it. I was saying, who's going to see a reptilian at Walmart? But I saw one. And Julie and I were checking out groceries, and there's this thing bending over. And when it bent over, I saw its scales under its skin. And I told Julie, I said, look, that's a reptilian. She goes, oh, no, I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look. She didn't want to see it. I watched it because, you know, they're lizards. You can't trust them. So, you know, you told me they're losing their ability to cloak now.
Yeah. The veil is really thin.
The Lord's taking it away.
These guys, you know, trying to, if they can't concentrate, you know, I mean, and I'm of the opinion, and I've talked about this before, that probably just about all of us has a little bit of Nephilim in us and a little bit of Abraham in us at this point, because we're all so mixed up at this point. And it says in the Bible that Abraham wouldn't be able to count his seed. They'd be as the sand in the sea. So we probably all have a little bit of that. So making a big deal about who is Israel and who's not Israel and stuff, I think it's a moot point at this point. We probably all have a little bit of it. But we probably all have a little bit of the Nephilim in us as well. I mean, the tribe of Dan isn't listed in Revelation for a reason. And in Ireland and up in there, you've got the Tuatha, which were from the tribe of Dan, and they were considered the fairies or the elves. You know, so we've got this whole thing going on, and a lot of people have been doing a lot of research, and that research is coming around. And at this point, we know a lot of people in the powers that be are probably have more of that bloodline in them than the rest of us. But I think, you know, with the stuff that's going on, the juice lately, and all the stuff that's in our foods, whatever is being sprayed in the skies, where it's getting turned on those genes, some of that genetic information. And people who don't have Jesus, Yeshua, in their hearts and have a relationship with him are more susceptible to that, because the Bible says, you know, renew your mind. And it has been proven that with neuroscience now, that if you renew your mind, you can change your DNA for the better or for the worst. So, you know, people are taking this juice, they're ingesting things, they're getting things sprayed on them, all the medications and stuff. So many things have the mRNA stuff in them now. And I think it's causing issues where some people, it's turning those genes on, and we're starting to see it more. You know, I mean, we still have people to this day that are born with 6 fingers and 6 toes.
Yeah, I heard you talk about that. Well, that was one of the things about that Giant of Kandahar DLC that was so prevalent, because Wade had, you know, after he told me about the Bigfoot story, then he says, okay, he said, now, he was over there in Afghanistan. He did about 3 tours over there, I think. And he said he was at that base when they brought that thing in. And he said, we were all standing around. He said, I wasn't one of the guys that's prevalent to get up close to it. But he said, we could tell that something was going on when the chopper landed and put this thing on the ground. And he said a couple of big forklifts come over there with machine pallets, and they put this thing on there, and they could see them rolling something great big into this net, and it was some kind of a body. They was looking through binoculars. They was all trading binoculars back and forth. They're standing on top of the troop carriers. Everybody's looking, The CO's screaming down, get down. You're not supposed to be over there, looking and everything. So, but Wade said they still got a good look at it. So I know that it happened because he wouldn't tell me no bull crap. He's solid.
Well, there's too many little stories of, those guys leaking that stuff out.
So. Yeah. And so, he tells me that. Well, about a couple of months later, I don't sleep good at night. And so I'm listening to George Norrie again. And he has this guy on his show that is the pilot that flew this thing back from Afghanistan to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And this kid says, he says, George talking to him, he said, well, how long have you been in the military? He said, I've been in about 10 years. He said, I've flown in more hot LZs than you could shake a stick at. He said, bombs going off next to the runway. He said, machine guns hitting the plane. He said, land under fire, leave under fire, all kinds of stuff. He said, never was really too concerned about it. He said it was kind of a thrill type deal for him, when it was going on. He was trying to see if you can get in and out without getting blowed up, And so never gave it too much thought. So he said, till they put this thing on my airplane, because he was a believer, he was a Christian. So he's got a big security clearance, so he's the one that's going to fly it back. So he said they put this thing in the airplane, they tied it down with a big cargo net, strapped it down with tie downs, and put a soldier on each corner of this pallet with an M249 machine gun. And if that thing would have gone off that pallet in the air, what do you think would have been like back there with 4 soldiers with that much ammo? Yeah, they cut that airplane in two.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he said this guy, he's flying. They got to refuel a couple of times, and they're flying back to the United States. And he said he kept having to look over his shoulder. He kept having this buddy, his co-pilot fly the plane. He'd get up and look through the door to see what was going on back there. He said something just kept telling me it was going to get up and it was going to be one of these things like you'd see in one of these comic book movies or something, It'd be fighting them in the air or whatever. But it said it never did it. It never did. So they landed and he got rid of it. And he said, he had some PTSD after this pretty bad. It messed him up a little bit. So I heard that story. And so about 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm listening again. And he's got this kid on there that was on the fire team that killed the thing. And so I'm listening to him talk, and George Norrie says, well, when you was, what happened exactly? He said, well, they found parts of the first team it had killed. And he said, as soon as they come around this rock, around this corner to where this cave was, where this thing was at, he said, it jumped out from behind this rock and speared their captain with this big pole. It was a copper lance about 4 foot long. He said, just picked him up off the ground like he was a matchstick, and he said it pulled his head off and held him up on the end of that pole and was drinking his blood, and this is going all over him. So while this is happening, these guys, they're freaking clear out, they don't know what to do. So they're shooting it all over and nothing's going on. So the sergeant told me, he said, well, shoot for the face, shoot it in the head. So they light it up with those 308 caliber machine guns and stuff. And they shoot it all over and kill it. And so they're all upset because it killed their captain. The guy was their friend and everything. So they call in a rescue team, and they come in with a helicopter and pick them up, get it out of there. And so George was talking to him about everything that went on. And he said, let me ask you another question. He said, when you guys were fighting this thing, did it make any noise? He goes, oh, yeah, it was making all kinds of sounds. He goes, oh, what was it like? He said, well, I can't mimic it. I said, humor me just a second. So George is gone for a second. He comes back on the air and he puts these sounds on. Now, these sounds were recorded by a guy that I know now. His name is Ron Moorhead, and he recorded, these are Bigfoot sounds that were recorded in the Sierra Nevada mountains back in the late 70s, early 80s when they were elk hunting. These Bigfoot were in their camp and they were making all these noises and they recorded them. So he calls it the Sierra Sounds. And so he plays those sounds, and this kid gets real quiet and he says, Mr. Norrie, where'd you get that? He said, well, that was recorded by a friend of mine in the Sierra Mountains back in the late or early 80s. He goes, that is the exact sound that thing was making. The exact sound. He said, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Right then, that told me that Bigfoot was part of the Nephilim, because that's the sound they make, and that's the sound the giants make. There you go. That's the connection. So I was at the Bigfoot Festival in Oklahoma down there at Honobia, and Ron Moorhead was there. And I went up and talked to him, and I said, hey, heard you on George and Norrie. He said, yeah, me and George are friends. I said, well, call George up and tell him this. So I told him what the connection was, and he said, are you kidding me? I said, no. I said, I listened to that show, and they played your sound. So he said, oh, man, I'll get back to the hotel. He said, I'll call George tonight. So they figured, I mean, that's the connection right there. That's it. It made the same exact vocalization.
Well, in LA Marzilian, some of them have gotten, I mean, I think a lot of people at this point have gotten DNA samples done, and of like hair that they found on the fences and things.
Yeah.
And he's gotten DNA of those skulls from South America, you know, the big skulls in South America. And the thing that is similar with these creatures is the mitochondria DNA is human, but the paternal DNA is not. So the mom, it's got mother human DNA like all the rest of us, right, but the father DNA is something different. It is not human. So that,
well, you know, these things are all over Oklahoma. I mean, people talk about, oh, it's only in the Pacific Northwest. There's more Bigfoot here than there is in Washington State. And you know, I mean, they're all over the southeastern part of the United States. Hell, they're right out here. They're right out here past the airport in Tulsa, at a nature center out there. They're everywhere. The people see them in the woods. You hear them about running across the road somewhere. Somebody saw them in the middle of the night. And who would think they would be out there where you guys live in that arid territory? But they're all over the place. I've heard 100 sightings out there, you know, just people that seen them. And they're here, they're everywhere, you know. And I had an encounter. I know that's what it was after I heard this guy tell this story. And I was hunting on a ranch up here in Osage County. This has been back 15, 20 years ago. And I saw this big bobcat, and I seen him go into this canyon. So I thought, man, I'll hide my Ram Charger over here and get my camo on. I'll slip up here in the trees and call him up and get him. So get ready. I get my stuffs on. I get over there and I sat down beside these little alders and got camoed up. I'm sitting there with my rifle, and I started calling, and I wasn't there 5 minutes, and I had that cat sitting 50 yards from me. He was looking right at me. And so when I got in a position where I could shoot, I shot him, and I was so close shooting that fast predator gun that I shoot. It's a really super fast rifle. The bullet didn't set up. It just went through him and didn't do hardly any damage. It just passed through him. Well, that cat rolled off that hill and was snarling and growling, you know, and he rolled down off these big old rocks. It was a big old hole out in the middle of the prairie. And these big rocks were circled this thing like a big U in there. These rocks are as big as a house. So I waited about 15 minutes, and I put my rifle in the truck, and I got my 10-gauge shotgun, and I threw it over my shoulder, and I went down in there, and I just shinnied off the side of them rocks. And I thought, I'm gonna collect this big old cat. You know, he was a big one. And so I'm down there, and it's kind of getting dark, and I'm looking around, and I get down in there, and it's like a big bowl right out in the middle of the prairie. It's deep in there, you know. I had to crawl off the side of these rocks to get in there. And there's all these bones and carcasses in there. There's deer carcasses. There looked like a raccoon carcass. I mean, there were just all kinds of dead animal bones in there. Some of them were bleached out white. Some of them were, you could tell, had been eaten on in the last month or so. Cow parts, you know, and stuff, cow heads. They're just a bone pile. And all of a sudden, I hear this deep growl. And this is something's growling at me. It's going real deep, like this, you know. And I go, that is no cat. You know, not even a mountain lion. I've heard mountain lions growl, and that is no cat. And I'm looking, I'm being real careful. I'm shining that flashlight under those big overhangs in that rock, and I'm looking. I don't see anything yet. And the sound, and every time it would do that, my insides would shake. And you know how your sixth sense tell you it's time to go? You know? I thought, self, you better get out here now, and I mean right now. And I throwed that shotgun over my shoulder, and I went up the side of that rock like a monkey, man. I got up on top of that hill, and I could still hear that thing growling, man. It was still growling at me. And I run and got the Ram Charger and turned around and got out of there. And I didn't know what it was at first. I thought, man, this must be a jaguar down in there or something. And so I heard this guy tell this story about a similar thing that happened to him. And what it was, I was down there where they live. I was right there into a cave where Bigfoot was. That's where they were staying. And that's why those bones are there. The Lord sent me a message. He said, that's what you encountered, Dave. You was right in their front room, you know. And I'm probably lucky to got out with my skin. Because I only had three rounds of that shotgun. Huh?
Lucky, blessed you didn't end up in that pile, huh?
Yeah, they put me on a stick, look like a popsicle sticking up there, you know, peeling me down as I went along, walking along. But yeah, those things, I don't think people realize what we're dealing with here. These things are real. I wish they weren't, but they are. They're everywhere. The Dogman, I think, is, you and I talked about that. The Dogman is a engineered species. I think the super soldier program is what they call it, because Hitler messed with this. Stalin tried to do it. A bunch of different countries have messed with this. They're trying to make an animal soldier that is almost impregnable with gunfire that they can control and use in a battle.
Yeah.
And they want it to kill people. Well, Dogman kills people already. And the way these things are, and they've gotten to now where I don't know how many different species they say there are of them, because they've crossbred and different breeding and stuff. So they've been here for a long, long time. We just didn't know it. And they're taking up residence here and there. And so people are starting to have trouble with them now. You know, they're seeing them. A guy called me the other night I went to weld school with. He thinks he's got them on his place over here by the lake. And so, you know, they're afraid to go out at night. And he wants me to come over there and go with him and look around a little bit and see what's there. But, you know, if somebody sees one, how many people won't say anything? How many people are scared?
Yeah, that's been the thing out here, is most of the cowboys out here have seen something, be it a UFO, Dogman, Bigfoot, you know, something like that. Most of them have. Whether or not they're going to talk about it, you know, you get them a couple of alcoholic drinks at a campfire late at night, and
Right.
you'll start getting some stories out of them.
Get somebody to open up a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that, I mean, I've hunted out there at night and been around. I've hunted out there for 30 some years and all over these different places all over Oklahoma. And it's not just there, but other places, because I've had Indian people tell me they go in at night, they get their chores done, they go in at night and they don't come back out. They stay inside because they know what's walking around out there. And I told a buddy of mine, I said, man, if we could take an airplane with some kind of a night vision device and fly over the prairie at night and just do a grid pattern back and forth, you'd probably be shocked at what you'd see. You know,
Right.
I know well, Paul knows this guy. I'd love to get with this dude. I want to talk to him. That said he saw the flying saucer on the back of the truck the night he was, he drove with a saltwater disposal or something, and he saw that saucer that was on the back of that truck. The military was transporting it somewhere at 2:00 in the morning, and you got that story. I've had other stories that people said that they've seen the military hauling stuff around late at night, and you're not supposed to be having any convoy type stuff going on at nighttime. After sundown, it's supposed to be illegal to do it, but that's when they're out because they figure everybody's under wraps. They're not nobody around.
Yeah.
But I've had more than one person tell me that they've been out at nighttime on a dirt road and they'd see one of these things walking down the road or across the road or something. So they're all over Oklahoma.